first car on the new dyno. Is that exciting? Yeah, okay. Here you go. All right, we've got this all wired in, that hooked up. I don't know if I mentioned that already. We've got this pipe all completely made up with the flange on it, got our map sensor and our blow-off valve. I have to get more electronic supplies so I can extend that harness out. I don't need that to fire the car for the first time though, because we don't need it to run the car. We have 12 volt power and we have ground hooked up to our ethanol sensor. If you ever need a place in the engine bay to get 12 volt power from, you can do an ADA circuit and use one of the injector fuses in here. It's a great place to do it. That's where I get the ethanol content power supply from. So we got this sensor hooked up. So I needed this pipe to just go on so that I could hook the blow-off valve up so there wouldn't be a vacuum leak after the throttle body. But we are at the point now where I can set up the ECU to set our base timing. Once the base timing is set, we can put this wheel back on and kick it out of here. I need to back it up so that I can get the wiring inside done, and I got to pass through one more input because I ended up using the input that was going to be for this. So we got to pass through one more input wire, which isn't a big deal. This is basically chassis mounted, so we don't need it to be on a connector to go to the inside, because if the engine ever comes out, we just disconnect the stuff for the engine stuff to take it out. So that is where we're at. So I'm going to pull the cylinder 1 coil plug out, rotate it top dead center, mark our top dead center on our wheel, and make a timing mark on the sensor. And then I just have to crank it over and set the timing. Yay. All right, so I decided to get this thing on the ground without setting the timing because I forgot I have a lot more wiring in the interior to do than I remembered, and this battery needs to continue to charge. But we have our boost controller completely hooked up. We have, what else did I do? Our map sensor is completely hooked up. We are tapped into the temperature sensor on the map sensor. So we have that. Blow-off valve's all hooked up. Everything's routed. We have our main engine ground for the ECU ready to go. Once I pass through the signal wire for the flex sensor, we can put the intake on for the final time. And that's all set. So now it's just getting some of the interior stuff done. There's no plugs in it right now because I want to do a quick compression test on this thing too to verify that's all good and ready to go. So yeah, now we gotta do the interior, which the wiring is mostly done. It's just gotta get finished up. All right, we've got the white car moved over here. I've got that last input hooked up to the flex fuel sensor, so that's hooked up. We got the intake on fully, so that's done. And then in the car, we've got 2 inputs for the throttle pedal that need to get hooked up. We have all our extra inputs, which are those white wires there. We have 2 switched grounds that need to be hooked up. And then Fueltech sells this cool panel, which is just a giant panel with a countersunk area for an FT unit. So I got to trim that to fit in this hole, which is where the Fueltech is going to go. Which I'm kind of nervous about because this thing's like $100 and I'm nervous. So gonna hook up the power. This can wait, so I'm gonna hook up the Fueltech, get the Fueltech set up, programmed, so that I can start testing stuff and setting up everything. And then I'll lift the wheel back up and set the base timing, and then it's ready to start. It's that's really where we're at. So I'm hoping tomorrow we'll have it running. Maybe driving. The first drive will be just on the dyno. We can put a little bit of load into it, make sure we don't have any leaks or anything like that, and that everything is working. And over here we have our 350Z project, which is back in here, which we'll deal with that. So that is where we are at. All right, we are officially 100% wired up. We are tied into the 5-volt out for the oil pressure and air fuel ratio. We are tapped into the pedal. I have my list of inputs over there. We have switched power hooked up to turn the unit on. We have switched power hooked up for the injector power. That should be it. So now the process of setting up a base map. And then once I get the base map set up, put the battery in, set our base timing, and then this thing should just fire up. It should just start right up. So that's kind of where we're at. So I'm gonna get a base map set up. Now, the injectors on this are the same size that we used in a couple other cars. So luckily I can just take that map, set the inputs for what they are, do the scalings, and then that should be that. The only thing I have to set is the timing. Obviously the tune's gonna be off, but I don't have to set up all the trigger stuff, which is nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and hopefully we can get this thing running shortly. All right, so we have all of this entered and the numbers entered in there, aside from the throttle stuff, which you have to calibrate in the ECU. The ECU is just sitting right there. I have checked over the engine setup, the trigger information is all set. So what we are going to do now is put this in the car, disable, how am I gonna do this? I'll disable the injectors by either unplugging all of them, or I'll disable the injectors, because the only problem I have is there's only like a actual disable all outputs. So all I can do is just set the wide open throttle so that over like 10%, over 10, there's a setting in here, over 10%, it shuts the injectors off. That's how I can do that. And then it's just setting the base timing. So I gotta put that intercooler pipe back on just so that everything is the way it's supposed to be. Pop the battery in it, and then I'm gonna just push this thing, move it over so that I can get this wheel back off and get a timing light in there. I'll just plug in one coil, tap into the ground on that coil with the timing light. And I might have to wait for somebody to come help me do the base timing, because it's a bitch to do by yourself. So get stuff hooked up. I just had my neighbor come by so we try to set the timing on this thing, and it's doing weird stuff. I've got no crank signal, and the cam signal's fairly sporadic. So one, I'm gonna ignore that. I was just testing something. So what I'm gonna do tomorrow, because it's the end of the day today, is we're gonna go through all the wiring, check everything. Everything else is working. All the pressures are working. I calibrated the throttle body, but yeah, gonna have to figure that out. All right, we're back to this thing, and I figured out the issue. I had two wires backwards on the crank signal. We've got RPM now, so I'm gonna put all that back the way it should be and set timing on this thing. All right, we've got fuel, we've got oil, we've got coolant, we've got our base timing set, we got our piping on. It's not clamped down, but it's on. We do not have a belt on it, but that's just because we're only gonna fire it up for a few seconds. No intake on it, so I can check the turbo. But this thing should start. I emphasize the should. Let's find out. got no vacuum source hooked up. All right. Let's see any fluids from that quick idle that we did. So, gonna put the belt on, put the wheel on. We're having an issue where the cam signal is sporadic. It will come in, and then sometimes when you crank it, it doesn't happen. So I gotta figure that out. But it fired up. So doing some idle and other tuning stuff, and I noticed a lot of oil on the ground. Well, it's a leaky valve cover gasket. This sat for a while, which, you know, partly my fault and partly just being busy, and the valve cover gasket probably just ain't good. So easy enough, we'll swap out the valve cover gasket, and then that's that. And then we're gonna throw this on the dyno to do some light load tuning. And then the way I found it was the valve cover gasket, because I was like, where the hell is this oil coming from? Because I couldn't see any on the side of the engine. But when I picked the engine up, picked the car up onto its side, it started leaking in the corner. I saw it building up moisture. I was like, oh, I don't know if that's it. And then it started smoking off the turbo manifold as it was dripping onto it. So that answered that question. So we'll go ahead and swap out the valve cover gasket. Luckily I keep those in stock, and then this will be ready to go.
Are you fixing your car?
Well, no, it's a customer's car. It's the first car on the new dyno. Is that exciting? Yeah, okay. Here you go.
Is this your car? Whose car is this?
Are we on the dyno? All right, so as you can see, this car was on the dyno, just doing some very rough tuning. Did some drive around tuning in it today. We got a issue with on throttle that I got to fix, but I know in the tune what the issue is. I replaced the valve cover gasket, and now it's leaking again, but from the opposite corner that it was leaking from. So I think there's something wrong with the valve cover itself. That's the only thing I can think is going on, so I gotta take that off again, which is why it's in here. But aside from the oil leak, it just needs some driving around tuning. It needs the engine to be broken in a couple hundred miles of street driving. So I gotta do an oil change because it's got a couple heat cycles on it now, and I gotta fix that oil leak. And then this thing's gonna be ready for like power tuning in the next week or two. So we'll see how that Garrett turbo does. I've done boost leak checks on this thing already. Everything's pretty much ready to rock and roll. It's gonna be a rowdy one. It was rowdy before, but now it's gonna be really rowdy. You know, ethanol, that fun stuff.